Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar for data providers. This is organized by the Data Europa Academy, which is part of data.europa.eu, which is the portal where all your data sets from the public sector are published. The topic of this webinar is From Theory to Action, Automatic Data Publishing. My name is Simon Steuer. I'm team of the Data Europa team, and with me are Julia, Marlene, and Inma. And could we go to the next slide? And we have three really distinct speakers today with us. Simon Dukowski from Fraunhofer Focus, Torben Jastrow, also from Fraunhofer Focus, and Bart Hanssens, who comes from the Belgian data portal. And you know the drill. So this webinar will be recorded. We will make it available on YouTube later on. You can put all your questions in the chat bar. And if the question is simple, our experts will try to reply to them directly. For more questions of discussions, we will put them for the end, and we will have a Q&A. So all the presentations will take place one after the other. And with that, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Simon Dukowski, who's a data harvester from Fraunhofer Focus in the area of digital public service.
Actually, it's Torben, the first one. Sorry.
My fault. Sorry, Torben.
Yes. Hi. Yes. This is the agenda. We will first talk a little bit about data.ap, then what the automatic publishing mean for Data Europa, and then two ways how you as a data provider can publish your metadata to Data Europa. And then we will talk a little bit about the do's and don'ts of the automated data publishing. And after that, we will have Bart Hanssens, our guest speaker, talking about his experiences. And yeah, then we will have the Q&A where you can ask questions. And after that, we would like you, as was said, to provide some feedback if you want. And yeah, I think with that, I will start to talk about data.ap a little bit. Data.ap, if you can just, yes, is the application profile for DCAT, the data catalog vocabulary, which is this is a specification for describing the public sector datasets in Europe and is used as the data model in data.europa.eu. There are about 117 catalogs in data.europa.eu that are harvested directly in dcat.ap. And yeah, this profile is based on linked data principles, the resource description framework, RDF, and yeah, dcat. And if you can move to the next slide. Yes, it's designed to increase the interoperability and allows the user to search for open data across multiple portals. And it's constantly refined. And the current version is 2.1.1. And you can learn more about dcat.ap under this link. I think you will get the slides after. So you can use that link and look there after this webinar. And yes, dcat.ap is consists of 4 core classes: the catalogs, data sets, distributions, and data services. And a catalog combines a set of data sets, and each data set has or can have multiple distributions. And distribution itself represents then the actual data and provides access mostly via direct download. And a data service is a rather new addition. I will talk about that later also a little bit more in detail, and it represents a service that can provide access to the actual data for a data set or for a whole catalog. There are more dcat.ap specific classes like catalog record or category, and each class, as you will also see later, has a lot of properties. The catalog itself has 18 properties, the data set has 35, and so on. And yeah, now to the data services. They are, as I said, more or less new. We had the distribution before that, which should link mostly to static files. And then the data service points to an endpoint with dynamic access. This can, for example, be used for current traffic data or on-demand data export, where you have to interact with a service to get the data and are not just able to download it. And yeah, data service can have mostly, I think, a distribution as parent, so that a distribution points to the service where the data can be downloaded. But it's also possible that a catalog itself can tell you where data can be accessed through the data service, as you can see on the image on the right. Yeah, more to dcat.ap. Maybe on the next slide, we have also data types and languages. We have sub-data structures, and we have also in dcat.ap vocabularies. If you can go to the next slide. Yes, dcat, there are mandatory controlled vocabularies in dcat.ap, and most of them are published by the Publications Office of the EU. Then you can find them also on the site linked there. Yeah, indeed, yes, this is an example, as I said. You can see on the left a distribution with its properties, with some of its properties. It's cut off, so it fit on the slide. And on the right, you see a catalog, a data service example, and a data set example, or part of it, just to show you how this can look like. Okay, now to the automatic publishing. Yeah, what it means for data.europa.eu. Maybe if you can go to the next slide. There are two main requirements for the automatic publishing. Your data, metadata has to be somewhere on a space that can be accessed, and it has to be in a format that we can understand. And it's important to know that only metadata can be automatically published, not the actual data. Now about, yes, the two requirements. The access can be, for example, a portal API, like you can see in the first point. It can be a file somewhere on the web, like you can see here. It's the example is from Bart, our guest speaker. It's a compressed XML, which we can use. It's on GitHub. And yeah, it's just a space we have to be able to access. And yeah, can also be a Sparkle endpoint, which we can also understand. And it can also be an Inspire endpoint. Yeah, about the formats, we prefer it to be in dcat.ap, of course. And as I said, there are a lot of catalogs already that have directly dcat.ap, but we, of course, also understand other formats. These formats then have to be transform mapped, and this can sometimes lead to data loss, because maybe not each field in the original format can be mapped to a field in dcat.ap. But yeah, it's possible, and for some portals we already do that, but preferred is dcat.ap. And yeah, as you can see, some examples we do understand is, for example, the CCAN API, UData, Socrata, the JSON API standard, or Inspire. And that's so much about these two main requirements. Now I think Simon will tell you more about the technical details and two ways of the automated data publishing.
Thank you. Okay, so now let's have a closer look to the two ways of automated data publishing that we have in mind. Next slide, please. The first one, of course, is the active part from our side, where we harvest you, which is a pull mechanism. Torben already said that most recommended is that you provide your metadata catalog in dcat.ap. It makes us much more less trouble. So you have two ways that you can offer us your catalog is the first one is via some kind of API or service, and the second one is via a download file. And another really important fact is it's required that your data sets are uniquely identifiable on your site. So we can map your data sets in later harvesting runs again to the already harvested data sets on our site. So that allows us to synchronize your data set catalog with the catalog on our site. So it's possible that we also delete and update the right data sets. The harvesting takes place in a regularly manner. That means we are able to harvest you on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly. It's really detailed, regularly possible. For example, we can also harvest you each second day or every 2 weeks or only on business days. It's up to you to decide how often we should harvest you. In case that you are providing directly dcat.ap, not providing us directly dcat.ap, so some other formats, we have to transform your metadata into our dcat.ap representations, and because that's in order to do this in the right way and in a manner that you are happy with that, you should provide us with a transformation and mapping. So we can together decide and define how each property from your site is mapped to the dcat.ap properties, and also when there are different value ranges, how we can map them to specific vocabularies, for example, in the dcat.ap word. So next slide, please. So how is dcat.ap, how in case you are dcat.ap, you're providing dcat.ap, how can we identify your data sets? Because the funny fact is that the dcat.ap specification does not really ensure that data sets are actually also identifiable. Of course, in RDF, each data set can have a URI reference, but does not need to. And also the DCT identifier as one property of a data set is just recommended or optional and not mandatory. So it's possible to provide a catalog without any kind of identification, but that's not really, that is not really helpful for us. But in case your data sets are identifiable, you should provide this identifier either via the DCT identifier, or each of your data set has a URI reference. So when we harvest your catalog and nothing else is specified, we first look for the DCT identifier. If we don't find any identifier, we take the URI ref, and we can also reconfigure the harvesting in a way that we first take the URI ref and then the identifier, or in case you provide a very clear schema of your URI references, for example, always starting with the same base URI, and the identifier can be extracted from the last part of the path component of the URI reference, we can also use these identifier. Next slide. So please, because we have our own namespaces for all our URI references on our site, what happens with your identifier? We take this identifier and just append it to our base URIs, depending on the type of object. So data sets, you can see here the base URI for data sets, for catalogs, catalog records, and distributions. So if your identifier is like here, your identifier, it will be just appended to the base URI, and that's the final URI reference on our side. Next slide. What can happen is that we have the same identifier from different catalogs. I have here made a Sparkle query to fetch the most appearing data sets, for example, dataset identifiers. For example, it reveals that we have from different catalogs always the identifier 17 4 times, or the identifier 1, 2, 3 3 times. Something like public toilets is also available 3 times. So we need a way how we can differentiate between these data sets from different catalogs on our site. And what we do is that we append a counter to the identifier. As you can hear, for example, for 17, we just append 2 tildes and 1. This is our schema for that. And so we are able to differentiate and map the right data set on our side to the right data set on the source catalogs. Next slide. The second way is the push way, how you can automatically publishing your data sets. That means it's the active part is on your side. For example, you can implement some active services that use our API in order to publish your data sets. This is something that we are still planning. It's not ready yet, so we need to define some organizational processes. So granting you the permissions, providing you authentication, credentials, and so on, and how this will be managed on our side. This is still something that has to be defined. Next slide, please. So, but if this is provided, in case we provide you access to our API for write permissions, you should be able to manage your data sets still with your own client-side IDs. Of course, you will be able, depending on the permissions we are giving you, to create or manage catalogs. Then you are able to create and update, also delete data sets inside your catalog or catalogs. You will be able to upload actual data. So we host also, it's possible that we host in let's say in a limit amount your actual data. And we provide also mechanism for drafting, first drafting data sets, publishing them, or unpublishing them. So this is similar to the data provider interface. Okay, so next section will be some do's and don'ts that you take into account. Next slide. The first one is again related to the dataset identification. You should not provide your catalogs, including datasets that are not identifiable. And you should also not provide your datasets with different ways how they are identifiable. Let's say, for example, a data.apa catalog containing datasets, some with URI refs and some with DCT identifiers. So it should be a clear way where and how you can your datasets are identifiable. So make sure each dataset is uniquely identifiable on your site, and yes, always use the same type of identifier, for example, DCT identifier. So in case you're not data.apa, what we take is from CCAN the name. That's also the historical reason why we don't use unified or something like UUIDs, because we started in the beginning with a CCAN-based infrastructure. So it was always requested that also identifiers on our side are somehow human readable or human friendly, and not something like UUIDs. And in other protocols like OAI, PMH, there's an identifier header. Of course, we take this, and also already mentioned data.apa. The DCT identifier is the preferred way to identify your data sets. The URI ref, or partially the URI ref, is also a good way. In Inspire, we take the GMD file identifier. This is, yeah, I think this is officially from the mapping of Inspire to data.apa, but I'm not sure. So, but identifier can be any kind of strings, and strings not always fit nicely into URI references. So on our side, we do some normalization of this identifier. Normalization means first we lowercase the identifier. We replacing all special characters. That means characters that are not letters or numbers with a dash. And in case there are multiple dashes, one after another, we reducing them into just one dash. So as the example shows, if you have some very crazy special identifiers, it ends up with a normalized one that you can see in the example. The next important thing for do's and don'ts is don't publish syntactical incorrect representations. This can happen when your implementation uses some templating in generating the DCAT AP, or when you build the DCAT AP with some string operations. Then a lot of syntactical errors can happen easily. So we recommend that you should use frameworks or tools in order to generate your metadata in DCAT AP format. Because these tools and frameworks are very mature in doing so and can make sure that everything is properly encoded. If you don't use these kind of tools or frameworks, you should consider to at least apply some validation checks automatically or from time to time in order to make sure that the metadata is correct. Next slide. So again, just to repeat, RDF metadata, DCAT AP is an RDF model, and RDF is something that describes data in triples. These triples build up a graph, and in triple stores where you can give the graph additionally a name, this results in also quadruples, and you can also represent these RDF graphs in different formats. If you only represent the triples, you can use RDF XML. There's a JSON variant. It's called JSON linked data, JSON LD. Or you can just use N triples, N3, and Turtle. And there are some specific variants that allows you to represent also quadruples. These are just one back, please. There are different purposes for these different formats. For example, if you use N triples, they are very nice for serialization, where others like Turtle are more fitting for human-friendly representations. So it's easier to read them instead of RDF XML or JSON LD, for example. So now next slide. If you check the syntactical correctness of your representation, you should consider two levels. One is the basic level, for example, XML in case you are using RDF XML, or JSON in case you use JSON LD. We had cases where providers are exporting their metadata catalogs with XML, and it was even not valid XML. So the problem is then we have issues when we parse this metadata catalog, and it ends up in not harvesting properly or completely the catalog. So you should make sure that on the first level you're providing valid XML or JSON or whatever format. And the second level is the RDF level. For example, in XML, RDF XML, you can easily make the presentation invalid. And also the coding of the URI refs needs to be checked. We recommend that you use frameworks for that. If you use Apache Jena in Java, or RDF4J is also Java, but there are also other frameworks in other languages like Python. They ensure that the generated representations of your metadata catalog is always valid. Okay, next. Just to show you how things can go wrong. If you, for instance, build up your metadata with string concatenation or with templating, here's an example on the left side, which is totally valid XML, but on the RDF level, it's definitely wrong. So you can see here the distribution, which is a predicate of the triple, of course, can actually only have one object, but here it has another predicate with a title, and not only the distribution as object. So on the right side, you see the corresponding valid format. Next is, in the next slide is another example how it can go wrong. So you see here the data set contains a distribution, but as an object, but not wrapped in a predicate. Okay, URI references. The point is, many providers put these URI refs unencoded, which is not valid. So there we always see URI refs that contain spaces or other special characters that are actually not allowed in a URI references, but always happens in programs, implementations that generate the catalog data. Just take these strings as is and forget to apply the URL encoding. And this results in many warnings and errors on our parsing side. Yeah, we have somehow to deal with it. Yeah, and sorry. The second thing is even in XML, there's another level of URI reference problematic because in RDF, you can also use the query parameters and the separator ampersand sign for query parameters. Although this is not a good practice to use such a kind of URI references, but it's possible. If you use this URI in an RDF XML representation, you have to ensure that the ampersand again needs to be encoded properly. Because in RDF XML, and that shows the next slide, it puts the URI references in XML attributes, and in attributes, XML attributes, the ampersand, for example, is an invalid character and needs to be encoded. Next one. Another topic is pagination and sorting. So you should not provide your catalog in a one huge chunk if it's a big one. Of course, if it's very small, a few hundreds of data sets, it's not an issue. But if you have 10,000 or more, it should be possible to somehow paginate over the catalog during harvesting. And the second thing is the data sets inside these catalogs should not be in an unpredictable order. So that ensures that the pagination works properly. Next slide. Pagination you can provide, for example, for REST-based APIs or HTTP protocols. You can provide pagination via the HTTP headers or via the query parameters. These query parameters are also available for Sparkle endpoints. And it's also good practice from the REST community that you may also provide both ways. And if you provide just the download dump of Ticket AP, it's also possible to include some RDF that offers pagination information. For example, the CCAN extension for DCAT that many CCAN portal providers uses the Hydra core vocabulary. So in this case, the dump is actually generated on demand, and then the DCAT extension includes there the pagination information also as RDF. Next. The problem with sorting is it ensures that when during the harvesting some changes appear, it can be controlled that these changes are not shifting the rest of the data sets to be harvested, so that we probably potentially skip some data sets or even harvest data sets twice. So the best would be that the ordering or the sorted order is on the modified or created tag, so that the data sets that are modified or created always appears at the end. Okay, next slide. The last point is the infrastructure. So I would highly recommend that you don't under-design your infrastructure, and that your API or your server for the dump file provide enough performance when we access the catalog. So it happens many times that during harvesting the server has some issues, and that the harvest is aborted on our side. The problem here is when we abort a harvesting, we miss the deletion phase, and it can happen that if it repeatedly happens, let's say day by day, and your catalog is providing new data sets, but we don't delete them, we have more data sets on our side than on the source side. So this could result in different amounts of data sets on both sides. For example, CCANX extension of DCAT seems to have some issues. The implementation is not rock solid, and from time to time on some pages it throws a 500 internal server error, and then we cannot harvest the full catalog, and we cannot enter the deletion phase, and this results in more and more data sets on our side. Other portal providers have issues. The request takes too long. So we have a timeout on our side, and in between us and the portal that we harvest, there are sometimes some gateways which have even lower timeouts, and the services behind need more time than the gateway allows them to serve, to take for the serving the data or the HTTP request. Next slide. So, for instance, there's also some portal providers that use some kind of load balancers, and the load balancers hide different nodes which serves the different pages. So if we send a page request, it is sent to one node, and the second page is sent to the second node, and then the nodes do have a different meaning of the pages. This also results in duplicate harvesting or missing data sets, because they're dropped between these different nodes. Here it can help that it's possible to harvest in a specific order, in a sorted way. So this can lower the risk that this makes some trouble. And of course, if we have some updates during harvesting, then the whole catalog or paging inside the catalog is shifting. So again, this results in missing data sets or importing data sets twice, which is actually not so critical, because we just override the first one. For example, the GDIDE portal is it's the biggest one that we have. It's also not really performant. It just provides around 20 data sets per second. So we have harvesting time from over 8 hours. And it happens also that during these 8 hours, the catalog is updated, and it happens that thousands of data sets are added during this harvesting run or deleted. So it ends up always with some kind of incomplete harvesting runs. It just could limit this risk by finding a harvesting time frame where at least very low changes are happening. But it would be nice if the performance would be bigger, so that the harvesting time can be around an hour or something like that, and then it would be possible to harvest a snapshot without any changes. So in summary, it would be really nice if you if your catalog access is really reliable, that it's also performant. And the third thing is that you can make sure that your metadata is syntactically correct. So that's important for the harvesting. All the topics about semantically correctness or quality is then on the next level, but not in the scope of this webinar. Okay. Now I would hand over to Bart.
Thank you. So I'm Bart, working from data.gov.be, and thank you for having me here. Next slide, please. We've been talking about harvesting and data and so on and so on. And the question is, of course, is there a business case? Is it worth it? And indeed, it is worth the effort. So, for instance, for publishing on data.europa.eu, we actually get questions or questions from, let's say, local or regional partners that say, we want to be visible, we want to be on the EU portal, especially for being known cross-border. And Belgium being a small country, it makes sense that the data sets are available so they can be combined with other sources available in other member states. The portal also has a nice feature on the machine translation for the descriptions. So we do not have the time or the resources to translate all those descriptions into various languages. So they are quite happy that the European portal does it for them. Next slide, please. That being said, I don't believe in the one portal mantra. Already on the Belgium level, we have local portals. For instance, the city of Antwerp, they have their own open data portal and they want to keep it. But they will also want to be visible on the regional portal, on the national portal, on the EU portal. And even on the EU level, there are different initiatives like Inspire or like the Eurostat portal that also include data that could be open data. So even there, you will see that's not only one portal, it's a whole set of portals, which means that it actually makes sense to make things go as automated as possible, and preferably using a machine-readable metadata description, which is, of course, all what data.apa is all about. So that's a good thing. Next slide, please. On top of this visibility, there are also indirect benefits. When we are talking about scraping, harvesting, collecting, republishing, it should also make people think about what they do with their data internally or how they process or handle their data internally. So once we talk about publishing on other portals, then often we get questions about, oh yeah, the metadata, which metadata should we actually provide? And are the titles that we are using and the descriptions, are they still up to date? Are they clear, understandable for anyone? Yeah, and all that automation stuff, how can we make that work? Because, well, maybe we have some internal systems, maybe not. How can we do that kind of machinery? And also, if the data is somewhat unclear or we do have to provide an update, who can we contact? Because often also internally you have to know who is responsible for a specific data set. And if you do not keep track of that, it's bad data management. It's a lot of work, or it could mean a lot of work if you're not already doing this kind of effort, but it's really worth it, especially in the longer run. The amount of data is increasing, and you have to keep track of your data yourself. So this could be a nice way of getting started with this kind of metadata and data management. Next slide, please. It's not going to be something that you can do in one day. Rome also isn't built in one day. And for the data.gov.be portal, it took several years. So in the beginning, and I'm talking about 2011 to 2015 somewhere, we had to make our own validation tools because there weren't any readily available. Luckily, we now have shackle validation rules provided also by the European Commission. That's a good improvement. In 2011, 2015, we almost had no other portals providing DCAT or DCAT AP. Now it's about half of them, at least in Belgium. We had to make our own scripts and conversion tools, and now it's more the standards of the shelf tooling. There is also some more Sparkle thingies for doing nice touch-ups. So it's the amount of code and the amount of custom manipulations is decreasing, luckily. Also in the beginning, we just did bare minimum. Now we're focusing on getting things right and adding more metadata description, especially also from translating, for instance, the Inspire metadata to GeoDCAT AP. So we see that we are now are going to aim at a higher level of metadata description and compliance. What is the same throughout all the years, and it will stay the same, is that we have a small informal community of portal owners. So we do not want to do much formal things or mandate stuff without helping people. It's called ICT for a reason, C from communication, and it really helps if you can get around a few people who are willing to make some changes and to help you with some conversions. Next, please. So you're not on your own. We have the support from the EU data portal team, which has been excellent. So thank you for that. You can also talk to other portal owners. If for some reason you would like to reuse our scripts or codes or Sparkle thingies, it's on GitHub. I can provide you the link. It will not be the most beautiful code, but for some people it might work. We have metadata specifications, and they are increasingly supported by tools and portals. Like I mentioned in the beginning, well, there was no DCAT AP support. Now you can see, for instance, Open Datasoft working on DCAT AP exports. So chances are that your tool is already looking into DCAT AP or is already providing DCAT AP exports. Perhaps the most important lesson, I would say, don't let perfect get in the way of good enough. You have to start somewhere, even if it's not perfect. It's important to make some effort to get started. And in the long run, it will be, well, the quality will become higher. It's a journey. It's an iterative process. So don't give up on that one. Next slide, please. If you would have some questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. You can send an email or you can chat with us on matrix.org, or if you want to have a short call, that's also possible. So I think that's more or less about it, unless there are questions.
Thank you, Bart. Thanks a lot for the presentation. And to the other two speakers, let's dive right into the questions. And I see Simon has been already busy answering most of them. Alice is asking, how can you indicate how often you want to be harvested? Simon, maybe for you?
Yeah, actually, we have a ticket system, and you can request via the official ticket, just creating a ticket, and we try to answer as soon as possible, as always. And yeah, it's easy. It's not big effort on our side. We just need to know.
Right. And Alice also wants to know, when will be the push mechanism be available?
Yeah, actually, technically, we are very close. So for me, it's there are many open questions regarding who is allowed, who is managing them, and so on. So this is something we need to discuss actually, and to decide how we want to handle this all.
Great. And how do you clean up different data sets that are appearing in a different catalogs, but they have the same IDs?
What means clean up?
Let's say there are twice the same data set.
Yeah, what we do is if we harvest two data sets from two portals with the same ID, we remember the original ID, and during harvesting we always check against the original ID. So the original ID together with the like the 17 together with a catalog detects the actual real data set on our side. So we have always a clear assignment between the original data set and the data set on our side. So if the data set on the original portal is deleted, we can detect that, and the data set is also deleted on our side.
Thanks, excellent. Inma.
Yes, just trying to dive a bit more into the explanation you gave, Simon, regarding the where and how to be harvested. For those colleagues who don't know about how to create a ticket, so as a data provider, what would you recommend? Should it be directly through the contact form on data.europa.eu? Can you please elaborate a little bit on that?
Sorry, I don't get the question.
Okay, so basically I would like you to further explain on how and where can you indicate how often you want to be harvested. So how are you in contact with your data providers?
We are don't getting in contact in this regard. If we are requested, either catalogs were on the list since years now. We just started harvesting them. We find the best suited time slot on our side, actually. And there were no process where we asked them. Later, there was an initiative, I think, requested also from OP, that we should get in contact with all portal providers that we harvest to make some things clear, like when is the preferred time slot for harvesting them from their side. But to be honest, I'm not sure what the results were, because I think there were no outcome from this so far. Because it's really hard, most of them, to get in contact with. Many of them maybe just don't care about.
Thanks. And yeah, Bart, please.
Yeah, if I can comment on that, we had more or less the same approach in Belgium. Luckily, in Belgium, it's a small country, literally, so we can even drive to take the train to meet people. But in the beginning, we also just started with doing stuff and then contacting the owners to say, okay, we're doing this, we're doing that. Can we help you? Can you make it clear? Can we improve things? And gradually it worked. In the beginning, it was like, sorry, we don't have time for that. It's yet another obligation. But now we see that after, well, it took a few years, but now it should be faster. That people are motivated to make changes and to help and to well, talk about those things.
Thank you, Bart. And the next question is also for you. How could data providers or publisher be better supported from us, the Data Europa team?
Oh, well,
What is missing?
Yeah, actually, you're already doing a great job with, well, this kind of webinars, this kind of also the tooling that's provided, that's very useful. I also like discussion on GitHub on the technical stuff. Also, the validation tool is very, very handy, and the metadata quality tool that you can more or less see what happens, that's a good thing. Other than that, I don't think you can actually do more than you do now, unless you start coding with all the portal software providers to improve the things. It's important to give this kind of webinars and to do some hands-on stuff with people or portals needing to some extra help. But all in all, I think you're already doing what you can. The tools are there, there are webinars, there are also a series of webinars, if I'm not mistaken, on DCAT and on open data in general, on also published. I even think they're available in multiple languages on the data portal. So keep up the good work, I would say.
Thanks.
It may
And,
sound like in some kind of a commercial, but it's true.
Also thanks for Bernhard for giving a shout out to the Endorse conference. The Endorse conference is organized by the Publications Office, and there are lots and lots of very cool topics and speakers. And I think for the audience, it's also an interesting event. We will also do a presentation there, and the program is now live, and you can register. So if you haven't done so, please do. And Corinne is asking who's in charge of archiving the datasets and at which frequency.
Actually, we do not archiving anything so far. It's planned in the future that we have some revisioning mechanism. So we want to store the history of the data set, but archiving is not the case, actually.
Okay, thanks. And one last question. Can you demo how we can set up the harvester for our API? Or does this go too far?
You cannot set up the harvester. If you want to be harvested by us, we need to know, of course, your API or the location where your dump file resides. And yeah, there's no yet really clearly defined onboarding process for harvester for portal providers. So we need to find this, define this more clearly, because actually we do it now on demand if requested, and we try to help in a way that's suitable. But to be honest, it is a lot of work. So it's a lot of effort on our side, as long as it is as it is. So for us, it would be really nice if we find good practice for that. So it's also on our topic list that we have to do. And yeah, I think it will happen soon. So it was discussed already a few days ago.
Super. Sam, maybe you can get in contact with Konstantin. He just posted the documentation. Maybe you could have a look and reach out to him. Other than that, if there are no further questions, I think we
can I make a
yeah, sure.
It would also be maybe it's forgotten in the whole webinar here, but one point is it would be really nice if you use for your API some standard ways and not proprietary, because that means it takes longer to include you in the harvesting process, because we need to implement a specific importer for that if it's a not well-known API or protocol that is in use. So it of course there are portal providers that would like to be harvested by us and already have something in place. Then we need to talk about. But if you plan something, please don't implement something proprietary. So.
And the follow-up question is, can you recommend a standard way?
I think looking at the Swagger, there is CCAN, which we support. So
of course, but we support. We recommend always data.AP. The first thing, and the second thing, yeah, we internally discussed this actually, what would be the perfect data provider from our side. And yeah, there are actually two, probably two ways. One is the OAI PMH protocol, including data.AP data sets, and the other one is a Sparkle endpoint.
Thanks. Maybe you could also put the links in the chat for the people to check it out. Jose Carlos is asking, do you plan to implement any tool to check the results of the harvesting task? For example, errors, warnings?
Everything is logged on our site, and we can also, we have a dashboard showing us what happens. The feedback, the direct feedback to the portal providers is something that we need to implement in an automatic way. Currently, we are getting from time to time in contact with portal providers that have issues, yeah, repeatedly. Let's say, for instance, portal providers where the SSL certificate is invalid, or they constantly throwing internal server errors or something like that. Then from time to time we get in contact with them and try to fix that. But automatically the results of a harvesting run is not presented to the outside yet.
Thanks. So with that, I think we can summarize the webinar. Maybe I give you my learning points, which are use standards, use data.AP, identify your data sets properly, invest time for your metadata, use frameworks, apply validation checks. So in the end, the more work you do, the better the data sets, the easier it gets for the users to find the right stuff. And with that, I would like to thank our three speakers and the people in the background for organizing everything. You will find all the slides on the Data Europa Academy, and the recording on YouTube in case you want to share it with some of your colleagues or you want to rewatch it. With that, I would like to thank you all for participating and enjoy. Bernhard, yes.
No, sorry, I just wanted to applaud.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you all. Enjoy your lunch, and hopefully see you soon for the next webinar.